who've been rounded up on the 6th and the 7th of April, and also on the 5th, because the opposition had called for a general strike on the 6th of April. And many of the bloggers were rounded up because they were involved in leafleting, in distributing propaganda, like in the streets, and calling for the strike. So they were rounded up because they were activists. Right now, two of the most prominent activists we have in Egypt, one is called Karim al-Bahiri, who's a factory worker from the Nile Delta town of Mahalla. He's been rounded up on the 7th of April, and right now we don't know where is he kept, in which prison. The other blogger, who's also a good friend of mine, and he's currently in detention at el-Marg prison, is called Muhammad Sharqawi. He's a left-wing blogger, and the same blogger 2 years ago was actually raped by the police in custody, which caused a huge scandal.
That was, wasn't there a phone video of that taken?
No, that's another actually video of a bus driver in Giza who was sodomized by the police. And the police was actually the ones who took that video and distributed it among his colleagues to shame him, so they said. I mean, you could hear all sorts of slurs and insults and these quotes, in the video. But the other abuse incident was not caught. However, Muhammad Sharqawi had the courage to step forward and talk about what happened, which happened to many other activists, but they didn't have the courage to speak about.
And what was the response?
The response, of course, there was no interrogation there was no investigation by the government. The government denied all claims, because in most, if not virtually all torture cases, usually police officers are acquitted.
What was he writing about?
Muhammad Sharqawi was, back then, when he was, detained 2 years ago, he was blogging about the movement, Kifaya, which is Arabic for enough, and this the anti-Mubarak movement, in addition to writing his own personal thoughts, on the blog.
How is it that the Muslim Brotherhood is illegal, considered so by the Egyptian government, but it has a fifth of the seats in the parliament?
Well, according to Egyptian law, and I think this might have even been something that we inherited from the time of the British occupation in Egypt before 1952, is that any political group based on class or religion are banned, meaning that if you're a communist and you want to establish a party calling for working class power, you cannot. If you're an Islamist and you want to establish a group based on religion, you cannot. That's according to the law. Of course, it's an unjust law and it's against civil liberties, but still the Muslim Brotherhood, they do run in elections as independents. They don't necessarily run under the banner of Muslim Brotherhood. That's why it's like a legal maneuver, basically.
And the amount of aid Egypt receives from the United States?
We are the second largest recipient of U.S. foreign aid after Israel. We receive something that amounts to $2 billion a year, 1.3 billion out of which goes to the military.
Hosni Mubarak's son, Gamal, do you think he will take power?
Well, that's, I think, what Daddy wants. I think that's what the Egyptian elite would like to see. I think that's also what the White House would like to see. But as we say in Egypt, you cannot make a sweet drink out of a rotten fish. And the Mubarak's family is a rotten fish. We don't care if the 80-year-old Mubarak is ruling or his son, who's in the beginning of his 40s, is ruling. It's a corrupt regime. And we do not want anyone from the Mubarak's royal family to continue ruling Egypt.
The protests being planned for Hosni Mubarak's 80th birthday in May?
Well, some bloggers are now calling for a general strike on the 4th of May. Whether that general strike is going to happen or not, I have huge doubts about it, but what I can assure you is that there will be protests.
What about the food prices rising? We're seeing riots, protests all over the world. What about Egypt?
Well, in Egypt, as you were just mentioning earlier, we call bread aish, which is Arabic also for living, because a great percentage of the Egyptian household's food basket depends on bread. And with the rising food prices around the world, especially with macaroni, pasta, and rice, people are even shifting more and more towards bread. But that's causing a huge crisis, because basically, on the one hand, prices of bread are skyrocketing. Secondly, bread is disappearing, and in 2 months' time, we have up to now, Amy, 15 people who were killed in the so-called bread queues. I mean, we have now bread queues that would trigger some people's memories here about
These
the
are
Great
bread
Depression.
lines to
bread
get
lines,
bread.
exactly. 15 people were killed. And it's like the French Revolution, basically, where people cannot find bread, so they are like killing one another, or now they are rioting against the state.
And what's the state's reaction?
The state's reaction was killing 2 young men in the city of Mahalla on the 6th and the 7th of April. Hundreds of people have been rounded up, not only activists, but also ordinary citizens. Many of them were abused in police custody at Mahalla's so-called first police station, including children as young as 8-year-olds.
How much power does the U.S. have putting pressure on Egypt? Does it put pressure at all around the treatment of dissidents, given the amount of money it gives, the second highest recipient of U.S. aid?
Well, if the U.S. government is sending terror suspects to Egypt to get interrogated under torture, I mean, we do not really expect the U.S. government to intervene in order to alleviate, you know, I mean, the plight of the Egyptian detainees. And actually, the Egyptian activist community does not want anything from the White House, because we do not expect anything good coming from the White House. But what we look for is support from the labor unions here in the U.S., from human rights groups. And on Friday, we're actually mobilizing for a protest in front of the consulate, the Egyptian consulate in San Francisco. And I hope as many people here in the Bay Area would show up for it.
Finally, what do you think the future holds for Egypt?
I think that the Mubarak's reign is over. I mean, we've seen pictures of the Mahalla rioters bringing down Mubarak's big posters in the public squares of Mahalla that triggered or echoed bells of the toppling of Saddam Hussein's statue in Baghdad in 2003, except in Mahalla there were no American tanks and the photos were not staged. So I expect the demonstrations, even if they had fizzled down now, to be revived again, because the economic situation has not improved. And hopefully we'll get another bread uprising that was similar to what happened in Egypt in 1977 that will overthrow the Mubarak's dictatorship. Where
can your blog be found?
My blog's address is arabawi.org, which is Arab and AWY.org.
I want to thank you very much for joining us. Hossam el-Hamalawy is an Egyptian journalist, blogger, and activist, as he said, blogging at arabawi.org, currently visiting scholar at the University of California, Berkeley School of Journalism, joining me here in Stanford. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, Raj Patel on the food uprising, the riots that are taking place all over the world. Stay with us.
Okay, thank you.